So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to what is the UK's first ADHD coaching summit. I'm Stephanie. I'm the founder of the ADHD Advocate, and it's my privilege to introduce David Giwerc, who is the founder of ADCA, the ADD Coaching Academy in the United States. I think at the time only there were two training providers for ADHD coaches, and ADCA, I think, is it still the two?
Well, the two that
ADCA
are accredited,
that are accredited by the
yeah,
International Coaching Federation.
yes, and the
So,
Professional Association of ADD Coaches, the two governing bodies, yes.
yes. And so, David, absolute pleasure to have David be here today and to kick off the summit and explain kind of how ADCA came to be and what impact, the ADHD coaching has on ADHDers. So, I trained under David and completely transformed my life. David has transformed. I can't imagine how many lives of people with ADHD through the training of the ADHD coaches. But yeah, very, very grateful to have you here. I mean, you've been doing this a long time. David, would you like to introduce yourself and tell everyone about how ADCA came to be?
Sure. Well, thank you. First of all, I'm very excited to be here. Stephanie is not only a terrific coach, but she's a pioneer. She's doing these wonderful things because education is the crucial foundation for moving ahead with your ADHD. Because if you don't understand the invisible challenges of inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity, and executive function, it's very difficult to move ahead in your life. And so the academy was formed. Basically, I have to talk about my own journey in order to explain to you how the academy was formed, because my personal philosophy is I don't present anything, I don't do anything unless I can do it on myself. Unless the concepts, the principles that empower people to move ahead are something that I know work, I'm not going to engage them. Plus, it had to be supported by neuroscience. I believe everything that we do has to be supported by neuroscience. So how did this all come about? Well, first and foremost, I was 38 years of age when I was diagnosed, 1994, 95 arena, somewhere in that time frame. I was working in New York City at the time in the ad agency business. And one day I woke up completely in a state of darkness, very depressed, and I didn't know why. And part of me was because boredom and monotony, which science tells us is the foundation and the nemesis of ADHD. The more bored you are, the less interested, engaged you are, the more your ADHD is going to show up. And I didn't know that at the time. Um, Later, neuroscience and research, a woman by the name of Nora Valkow, showed through PET scans in a 9-year research study that the less engaged a person with ADHD is, the more bored they are, the more monotonous and the more pressure they're under, the harder they try to pay attention to the more their brain will shut down. And at age 38, this was what woke me up. I had read this piece of research in a book written by a good friend of mine, Ned Hollowell, who is a psychiatrist at Harvard. And it was one of the first books I was able to sit down and read without getting interrupted, without getting distracted. And I said, this is interesting. How come I can read a book that's interesting and not get distracted? How come I can play a sport that I love for 2-3 hours without getting bored? How come I can do all these things that express the things I do very well consistently? But when it gets to those things like accounting or expense reports or doing these things that are mundane and robotic, the harder I try to pay attention, the more my brain shuts down. And I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I was broken. Because how come these things that are so easy for everyone else is something that I can't do? And yet there was this other side of me that did things exceptionally well. This paradox of ADHD was something I had hidden for 38 years of my life, even when I had been successful in the ad agency business, because I worked 10 times harder than everybody else to maintain a status quo. People didn't know how hard I worked. But the things that I did well, I did exceptionally well, that came naturally to me. But the things I didn't, I struggled with. And I worked much harder than everyone else. And so when this book came out, Driven to Distraction, and it started explaining many of the challenges that I experienced with this paradox of ADHD, and taking the research into account by Nora Valco that ADHD is a deficit of interest, these two things ignited a journey of discovery where I needed to find out what's going on here with this a thing called ADHD, with these invisible challenges. And as I began to do my own research, I began to learn a lot about the brain. But I also saw how pervasive this thing called ADHD was, and people were running around with these challenges of inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. Now, let me just say something about this. All human beings, we call them neurotypicals. I don't really like the language, but that's what we have. The people who don't have ADHD, everybody struggles with inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. At some point, you can't pay attention to something. At some point, you're impulsive, you make a bad decision. And at some point, you have this excess physical energy and also cognitive, a bombardment of thoughts. But the difference is people with ADHD, it doesn't impair the quality of their life. People who don't have ADHD, it doesn't impair the quality of their life. People who do, when you're bored, you can't just neurologically turn the switch off and pay attention to, because the harder you try, the more your brain will shut down. And this was shown in PET scans by the same woman that's the head of the National Institute on Drug Addiction, Nora Valco, where she said ADHD is a deficit of interest. Now, as simple as that sounds, this research was very foundational to me as an individual and in the coaching. But what was so interesting in her research, which showed PET scans, which showed that ADHD is a challenge of engagement and motivation and boredom, in this research, she said, and it should be incumbent about the healthcare profession to use the word of interest and motivation in the language of diagnosis and treatment. And you don't see it. You don't see it. You don't see it. And so we coaches, one of the things that we do, and I learned to do, was because it was so rampant. In fact, at age 38, they told me I can't have ADHD because I'm an adult. In 1994, they told me I can't have ADHD because I'm an adult. Imagine. And I said, well, this is interesting because I'm reading this book here and all my challenges are showing up. So I couldn't get diagnosed until I found a psychiatrist that was ahead of Albany Medical School. I lived in Albany, New York, capital of New York State. And he was the only one, a psychiatrist. And he began to explain to me what ADHD was. I was 38 years of age. And so you can imagine, for 38 years of my life, I'm not the only one, I didn't understand this paradox between weakness and strength in a world that emphasizes weakness. Work on your weaknesses and make them stronger and you move ahead. Doesn't work. And so this nice man, the psychiatrist, began to explain, well, ADHD is a challenge of your prefrontal cortex. And he started using words like dopamine neurotransmitters. And he started using all these big words. And I lost them in about 5 minutes into the conversation. But I was excited that I had a diagnosis. I was just so excited that I had a reason, a label for why life had been such a struggle in my area of weakness. And so this was very enlightening, but it created a whole new transformation because I realized most of my life I had been paying attention to what I couldn't do at the expense of what I could. I was paying attention to belief systems and stories that, like in school, they said, work on your weaknesses, and if you make them better, you'll move up the ladder of success. And what I realized, it came down to this: ADHD is a challenge of momentum. It's a challenge of activation. And let me explain this to you so you all get this simply, because it doesn't have to be complicated. What I realized with every client I worked with over close to 30 years, with every coach I trained, with every training that I ever did, that if they didn't understand their ADHD, not just the concept of ADHD, their own specific brand of ADHD, if they didn't understand what the invisible challenges of ADHD did, they will never, ever make progress in their lives with the ADHD. That was the first thing that I had to learn to do for myself. And it was the first thing as we created a curriculum for coaches to have models, to have language, to have tools that would quickly and simply and powerfully educate people about their own ADHD instantaneously, because people with ADHD are impulsive and they're impatient. They're not going to wait 2 years to understand this. You have to get them quickly and effectively. And so we developed a model, certain models. One was called the I model on interest and intention. And if you can't pay attention to things that are not interesting, even inspiring, and have no intention of where it's going to go, your ADHD is going to languish. You're going to be immobilized. So that was the first piece that I learned, and I had to do it for myself. So I developed models and I developed ways of educating myself so that I could plan for situations. ADHD is what's also called situational variability. That depending on the situation, your ADHD will show up in either a strength or a weakness and nothing in between. That's the paradox. So we had to learn to educate coaches, and those coaches would educate their clients, because if you don't know where the invisible challenges of ADHD show up, it's very tough to get your day started. And so we started from there. And the first thing that I learned on myself and became very powerful with clients that were coming out of the woodwork with ADHD was to explain to them, you know what ADHD really is, and you won't hear this anywhere else. ADHD is a challenge of momentum. That's it. And what does that mean? If you use the metaphor of a car, and you have a car in your garage, and you have to get your car started every day, if you don't know the fuel that goes into that car, you don't have the key for the ignition, your car is going to stay stuck in the garage all day long. And so I knew that I had to give myself permission to focus on those things that activated my brain, that inspired, and that was inspiring, and give myself, like the book I wrote, permission to proceed with embracing the best in myself. And why was that so hard? Because unfortunately, we live in a world where the human brain is programmed for a negativity bias. All of us, in fact, there was a guy by the name of Baumeister, right? Baumeister at the University of Florida, that did a huge research project that said bad is stronger than good. Now, that's all human beings. But here's what we know about the science of ADHD. People with ADHD ruminate more. They have more negative stories. Because here's the crux. The first thing is ADHD is a challenge of momentum. And the second thing is what you pay attention to grows. If I don't pause, what we have to do is we have to teach clients and myself, people with ADHD, to pause and pay attention to the signals in their body that come out of the invisible realm of mind by the stories that they tell themselves. That the stories they tell themselves, such as I'm broken, I can't, I won't, I never could, we listen for language of the mind because words create worlds. And when those worlds and words are of a negative nature, like the negativity bias, and you don't pause to challenge that story, then that story creates neurochemicals in your brain and your body, like cortisol, which creates more stress. Is there any wonder why anxiety and ADHD go together? Because we are dominated by negative stories that have not been challenged. So as we were educating our clients about their own ADHD and saying, you have to give yourself permission to pay attention to those things that activate your engine in your car so you can get going, it has to be sustainable. What's sustainable? Those things that inspire us. So not only do we have to explain ADHD, we have to teach people how to pause and notice the signals in your body and take in and breathe deeply, because the brain needs 25% of all the body's oxygen to function. There was biology involved in what you pay attention. And if you didn't breathe, the part of the brain that makes you human, the prefrontal cortex, which is also implicated in ADHD, would not be available to identify the signals in your body, because emotions are what dominate all human brains. We are emotional beings. And if you don't pause to pay attention to what you're paying attention to, then you don't have the ability to use that part of the brain that allows you to identify it. We become emotionally dysregulated. We become immersed in the emotion and we can't self-regulate it. And this is why it's so important, because people with ADHD have challenges with emotional regulation. It's not even the diagnosis of ADHD, but we who work in it know that ADHD is a challenge of emotional self-regulation. And here's what else we know. And I discovered this because the theory of emotion, the way we create emotions, the neuroscience of emotion has completely changed over 30 years. We construct emotions in the moment. We construct them. How do we do that? ADHD individuals, like all human beings, predict the futures. Our brains are always predicting. How do we predict? By a context and memory that we have stored away in our memory, that when we go into new situations and we predict, or even a situation that we may have done something well in, we go into our memory in our brains and we access whatever context is similar to that. And that's what gives us the framework, the frame of mind to either act or not act. So think about this. If I don't know what I'm paying attention to, because I don't pause, inhibition, challenge of ADHD, and I'm distracted by things that are boring, and I don't know how my ADHD shows up, and I don't know the dominant stories in my brain that give me a framework to make decisions, life is going to be very, very tough. And that's how my life was at age 38. Despite the fact that I had had some success, I was paying attention to all those things that did not serve me well. All the stories. And I had to begin a process of beginning to access and excavate the stories of success, fulfillment, and joy that I had buried. And why did I bury them? Because I didn't know how to create momentum in my life. I didn't know the positive stories that were moving me forward. I didn't have the ability to pause, emotional regulation. I didn't have the ability to challenge the stories that I was telling myself. And it all came out of an understanding of there is greatness inside of me, but I've buried it. Because if we don't pause to pay attention to things when we're even successful at them and celebrate them, there's an actual term in positive psychology, savoring them. If I don't pause to savor the experience of success, fulfillment, joy that I know, I don't believe. Beliefs need to be challenged. I had a belief that you need to take care of everybody else before you take care of yourself. That was taught in my family. It almost killed me. I was taught that asking for help is a sign of weakness. That almost killed me, until one day I paused and said, I cannot do this alone. And I need to understand, despite the fact that I know I have things I do well, why is it I'm always immobilized when I have to get my day started? Because I didn't know how to create momentum. And creating momentum meant only this: I had to go inside of myself and begin to excavate those things that made me come alive. ADHD is a challenge of aliveness. It's not only a challenge of momentum, it's a challenge of aliveness. And what we coaches do is we begin to invite our clients to go through a transformational process of exploration to identify who they are before they choose what they do. Who they are to choose. This is what separates ADHD coaching from all the other professions, is that we have an ADHD lens, that it can explain the neuroscience of ADHD in terms of activation of the brain and how it gives you momentum to move forward, and how, as a human being, you can't move forward until you understand what makes you tick, what makes you come alive. This is true for a child. This is true for a parent. This is true for any individual with ADHD. And what I found overwhelmingly is that my clients from day one not only had a very strong negativity bias, didn't know where their ADHD showed up, but what was so sad, they didn't allow themselves to dream anymore because they didn't know who they were. They didn't know the personality ingredients that made them come alive. So out of all this evolved a coaching process, which in 1998, I opened up the ADD Coach Academy. And I said, not only do we have to have tools and skills to educate people, but there needs to be a collaborative process called coaching, where we don't give the answers to the clients. We mirror, we listen. After they understand their ADHD, the real coaching begins. And if diagnosis and treatment is part of it, because this is a biological challenge, the pill doesn't give you the skill, but the pill will put you on a level playing field, as it did for me. Medications were very important, but I realized medication would only put me on a level playing field. I had to go through the discovery process of understanding all these things and giving myself permission to embrace what made me come alive. And so at age 38, I completely shifted a career as vice president of a large ad agency because I realized by asking myself the question, if I stay what I'm doing now in this mundane world where I become robotic, what will happen to me? And my answer was, I will die a slow death. I will die a slow death. That's the truth. It's exactly what I said to myself. And coaching was just beginning to be formed as a brand new profession, life coaching. There was no ADHD coaching. And in fact, life coaching was just developing the competencies of the discipline and the skills. And so I sat back and said, what kind of process would I like to create? Eventually, later, it became more clear when Barbara Luther, director of training, and Marla, my wife, came in. I was doing it all by myself, almost killing myself, till I challenged the belief that I needed to go out and get help. Barbara came in, and now it's grown into something larger than I could have even imagined. But we had to have a process because being an ADHD coach was a profession and a discipline that was a privilege to be able to work with people, but they had to be extremely well educated and extremely well trained because people that didn't have this training could do great damage to people with ADHD. In fact, life coaches that tried to coach people with ADHD were doing damage. And so we began to create a process in 1998 when we opened up. And now we are training in over close to 60 countries. We are one of only two accredited by both the International Coach Federation, which is the life coaching organization, and the Professional Association of ADHD Coaches. So there is a governing body just for ADHD coaching. And what we did is we first had to create a process about how do we educate our clients? How do we energize them to be able to overcome the negative impairments and visible challenges of ADHD so that we can empower them to embrace their unique brain wiring? When it all came down to it, ADHD is a unique brain wiring. Okay. And so we created this process with competencies and skills and standards so that to become an ADHD coach meant you got a certification from an accredited school, of which there are only two in the world. Ourselves, International, the ADD Coach Academy, and Mentor Coaching. They were the only two that are accredited by both ICF and PEC, the two governing bodies for our profession. Very important. If you're going to go out and look for a coach, ask them, do they have their certification from an accredited organization? Because if they don't, you don't know what standards they have. You don't know if they've gone to a fly-by-night school, some school that's made their own curriculum up rather than being vetted out by professionals who are dedicated to making sure that accredited schools train the best coaches in the world. And we're proud to do it. We've been doing it for a long time, and we're very proud of the work they do. So this is what I would like to leave you all with before I end my little speech. Can you tell I'm a little bit passionate about this? Just a little bit. There's a word called zesty. I've been accused of being very zesty when it comes to ADHD coaching. And this is what I would like you to leave you with. We have people who diagnose. Those are our psychiatrists. Very important. Give you with the biology that you need. We have therapists. Very important to work with cognitive distortions. Okay, belief systems that don't work. With ADHD coaches, we'll identify those stories, but if the client can't move out of those stories and they're stuck, I'm sending them to a CBT therapist. But when they need to be educated and when they need to be energized about what makes them tick and the strengths that they already possess and begin to embrace it and anchor it, we let them know that they've never been broken. They are not broken. They have a unique brain wiring. And because the world doesn't understand ADHD, the invisible challenges of ADHD, because the world doesn't even understand the brain, let alone the invisible challenges of ADHD. And most of the healthcare profession globally does not understand it. ADHD coaches are instrumental in pioneering how to help clients with ADHD navigate life with ADHD. And here's what I'm here to tell you. Those people that have worked with well-trained coaches, a large number of them, we have the research to prove it. We did a research project. It wasn't published, but we did it with Russ Ramsey at the University of Pennsylvania, Tulane University, and it showed that by far people who had ADHD coaches' self-efficacy, self-image, self-perception significantly improved. And they had much more success and fulfillment through the coaching process. And one of the reasons is why, because they understood they were not broken. In fact, we have 100 billion neurons in that brain of ours, each one connected to different synaptic connections that allow us to communicate. Literally, each human being has trillions of options, processing options. And the school says, do it our way or the highway. And the workplace says, do it our way or the highway. And even families who don't understand it, you will do it the way they all tell you, or else you won't move ahead. And what they don't get is each of you have a unique way that you process information and process the world around you. And you all have a unique way of doing that. That's a strength. Some of us are kinesthetic. We need to move around. Some of us are visual. Some of us are auditory. That's what coaches learn to help clients identify their unique brain wiring, not in only terms of their self-image, self-esteem, and performance, but through character, through those personality ingredients that are like kindness, love, social intelligence, but also the unique way that we process information. I'll just give you one quick example. When I was a kid growing up, I didn't know how I learned. Nobody teaches you in school how you learn. Nobody even teaches you, oh, what signals are you feeling in your body? Have you paused to breathe? Nobody teaches you that. It's not taught anywhere in the world. These are life skills that if you can't identify the emotions that are occurring in your body and they're of a negative nature, they will immobilize you. Emotional intelligence is especially low. The ability to identify emotions as they occur in the present is a skill that only 1/3 of the world has, not just people with ADHD, more pervasive. And I didn't know how to do that. But what I did know is how to explore, how to figure out, because I didn't want to be a failure. So I went into my bedroom as a kid and I figured out, how do I learn? And as a young kid, I broke 2 couches because I was so hyperactive, rocking back and forth, that my grandmother bought me a rocking chair because she couldn't keep buying couches. My mom and dad were going to get bankrupt with me and my hyperactivity. So they bought me a rocking chair. And what I did is I would go in and on my own, because I didn't want to be a failure. I didn't know anything about ADHD. I mean, I was born in 1956. In 1970s, when I was in high school, we didn't know any of this stuff. I just knew I was challenged by learning because I couldn't do it the way they wanted me to, which was sitting there and memorizing. And so what I did, we were learning the Declaration of Independence. I remember this wonderful document the United States created for its independence, and we had to learn it. And I remember rocking on my rocking chair, singing Row, Row, Row Your Boat. That was my tune while I was rocking the chair to the Declaration of Independence, while in my head I was creating visual symbols. And at the end of it, I drew 6 key words of Declaration of Independence. It took me a lot longer to get there, just 6 key words and a few visuals. And I had the whole Declaration of Independence, the essence of it, for my exam. And I went through high school with good grades, but I worked so much harder than everyone else, rocking on a rocking chair, singing my notes. And when I became an adult and I had to write a book, because they said, you know, David, you're head of a school, you got to write a book. I freaked out because I remembered in high school, I couldn't get 5 pages out of this brain because I was so overwhelmed by so many thoughts that I couldn't access any of them because I was bombarded, cognitively, hyperactively bombarded. How do I get these ideas? So voice activated software was coming out, and I got naturally dragon speaking, and I began to verbalize the thoughts in my head using mind maps. Take the ideas and put them up visually. But I did it again while I was kinesthetically moving. Kinesthetic, auditory, visual. 3 modalities. That's what you learn in coaching. Nobody teaches you how you learn. Learning styles in schools has been an abysmal global failure because you cannot identify a kid's learning styles by observing. You have to do a coaching process of exploration and discovery to find out how it works, just like I'm sharing with you. So this is what I want you to know. ADHD coaching is here to stay. It is a very important profession as part of comprehensive diagnosis and treatment. It's not the answer all, but it sure is a heck of an important area because coaches know better than anyone else how to help their clients navigate the invisible neurological, biological challenges of ADHD and empower them to embrace the greatness that already exists. And so what I want to leave you with is this. If you want to work with a well-trained coach like Stephanie, who knows her stuff, who can educate you about your own brain wiring and take you through the process of helping you discover what makes you tick so you can sustain it for long periods of time and anchor it, because you will forget. ADHD is a challenge of memory, and create prompts to do that. The coaching process has been doing this for close to 30 years, ADHD coaching. And when you think about 30 years is not a long time for a profession to develop. It took psychology almost 100 years. Okay, we're a third of the way there. We're not at the level of research of psychologists, but we're working with them. And my hope is that the other professions in the world, the public, will learn to recognize that well-trained ADHD coaches as much as part of the solution to effective treatment as diagnosis with a psychiatrist, with cognitive distortions with therapists, and then we can help bridge those gaps together and working with all of them. And I know this because I've been doing it for 30 years, and I know it because we're putting out more certified coaches than ever before, and it's not nearly enough. It's not nearly enough. There's not enough therapists, there's not enough doctors, there are not enough coaches. But the first thing that the public can do to make it better for themselves is get educated. And so that's why I'm so glad Stephanie has created this wonderful summit for all of you to get educated about what coaches do, because we're the point person. We try to bring it all together for everybody. And so, Stephanie, I want to thank you for having me here. UK is a very powerful part of the world for me. We have a lot of UK students. Of course, America was built from the UK. We came out of it, and it's a country that we're very closely allied. We love dearly. And my hopes are that UK will become as well educated as parts of the other world, like Australia, which is doing unbelievable things, and the US, which has a long way to go because we are such a big country. And we need to educate so many people. So I thank you for allowing me to be here to talk about the evolution of our profession, how it's credible and disciplined, and how effective it truly is.
Well, David, no, it's our privilege and honor. I don't know how to follow up on it. I think we could end the summit right here. David has explained exactly what coaching I mean, you couldn't get a better explanation from literally the father of ADHD coaching, David. We're so lucky. You're so inspirational, just, hanging on every word. And hopefully the participants here can get a much better idea of just how transformational ADHD coaching is. Thank you so much. And we definitely want to keep working with ADCA to help spread the word and help support many more ADHDs. As you said, there's just so much more that we need to do in terms of raising awareness and getting the support ADHDs need in this country and beyond. So we've all got to work together, definitely.
And Stephanie, I'll leave you with one thought. We're near the end of ADHD Awareness Month. And one of the things that I'm just realizing is in the, I think it was 2003 through 2006, I was president of the Attention Deficit Disorder Association, which is the world's largest adult ADHD organization that educates people. Wonderful organization. I encourage all of you to go out and check it, add.org. But as president there, myself and Evelyn Green and Michelle Novotny, the three of us, helped write Resolution 390 to the United States Congress and Senate, identifying the need for one day called Awareness ADHD Day. And it was unanimously passed, and we had ADHD Awareness Day in 2000. I forgot exactly when, but out of that came ADHD Awareness Month. And so I'm very proud of that because it's so aligned with what we do as coaches, is the education piece. And now we have Awareness Month globally. It started in the States, but it's much bigger than the States. And this is so important that we expand it globally. So important. So thank you for doing this.
No, thank you. Like, yeah, it's amazing. We're very, very lucky to have you. And someone's actually asked, what do you say to educate people who say that ADHD is not a real condition? I mean, there's extent.
So the amount of research is overwhelming evidence that ADHD exists. What I do is I like to take, if you go and look at any research, at the end, there's always a discussion and an abstract. So you don't have to read all the good research. But when I take a piece from the research and I just take the discussion page, and the discussion page gives the essence of what the research did in the abstract, I just give one to this. And why is this so important? Because these come out of some of the most credible scientific organizations in the world: National Institute of Mental Health, National Institute of Health, American Medical Association, American Psychological Association. All the major healthcare organizations in the world have research on ADHD. And there is a petition that was signed by the world's top 100 scientists coming out and saying that ADHD is a real challenging bioneurological condition that exists. So it's just a matter of getting the research to somebody in short version. You can't tell them, don't tell them go read a book. That's the word, go read a book. That's just not going to work. So quick page and summary or auditorily, there's just a lot, but summarize it for them. Give it to them simply.
Yeah, particularly if they've got ADHD, right?
Especially, yes, good point.
Yeah. Thank you so much, David. Honestly, we're going to circulate this far and wide, this recording of your
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, David.